That was freaking hot. We're gonna install some hardware in this thing today. We're back at the hardware store. Make sure you have all your fasteners ready before you start this project. We're installing 2 T5 full spectrum LED lights. They're 5 watts each. They're not harsh. We're also installing a 4-inch fan to the ceiling of the enclosure. Now, the first thing I do here is I'm just laying everything out, deciding where I want to place it on the roof panel. Just a quick note, if you guys are wondering why I'm putting a fan in this enclosure, is air movement is really important when you're dealing with live plants. Stagnant air leads to significant fungus growth, so that's why that's going in there. So once I'm happy with the placement of how everything's laid out, I start to screw the things down. I start with the RHP because the spot that's in really kind of non-negotiable. Next, I'm going to plug in these lights just so I can see how the wires run and decide whether or not I'm going to move them at all, and if I'm truly happy with where they are. I decided here that it was probably best if I measure out exactly where the cutouts were for the wires to pass through the back panel and mark those down on the roof panel of the PVC. That way I knew where exactly I needed the wires. These lights fit pretty tight, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't having any issues running the wires out the back. I then just marked the placement of that first light, and I installed the clips that are going to hold it down to the roof and did a quick check to make sure I didn't screw all the way through the top. At this moment, I decided that I didn't actually want that light at the front. It made for kind of a messy setup, so I moved it to the back of the panel and marked that light, installed the clips, and screwed them in. Again, I'm going to check and make sure I don't actually screw all the way through the panel. The fan was a little more tricky because the fan that I ordered was actually an external computer fan, and it comes with these little rubber feet that are supposed to minimize noise and vibration, and I ordered it specifically for that reason. Not totally because of that reason, but that was one of the big selling points to me. Now, each foot was attached by its own screw, and I needed those screw holes to attach the fan to the roof panel, so I had to remove all of those screws, there were 8, and the feet, and replace those with longer screws so I could mount it to that ceiling panel. You'll see me fumble a lot with this because the screws that I bought actually were just a hair too short, so I ended up taking off 4 of the feet because they didn't really serve a function anyways, and then I just put the feet back in between the fan and the ceiling panel so that there would be no noise and no vibration when the fan was turned on. Just a quick note, if you guys are going to install fans inside of the enclosure, make sure you take a moment to really look at the fans that you're buying. Make sure that they come with a grate over the actual blades, that the snake cannot get to the blades. Make sure there's no holes, no gaps or anything, and if there is, make sure you have a backup plan on how to close those gaps. Finally, I'm just going to use some cable ties here and tie up all these wires so that there's no hanging loops and no loose slack that Toad can get up into and get tangled in. Then I'm just going to do a test fit and make sure that everything fits properly. Nothing's rubbing on the sides, front, or the back. The wires can easily come through the holes in the back, and there's lots of clearance. Nothing's touching, nothing's rubbing. The cord for the RHP, I didn't leave a ton of room to work with for that one, so I decided to screw that in while the roof panel was in place. I'm using these little cord clips that came with the RHP, and I'm just going to tack that cord up so that it's not actually touching the unit, but the cord also isn't touching the sides. I tried to give a better visual of what I was doing here, but ultimately, while I was editing, I realized you can't actually see what I do, so I ended up cutting that video. And this is how it turned out with all the ceiling hardware installed. The RHP, 2 lights, and the fan you can see is running. I did remove the background noise, but I will insert it in a later video. There is no noise. You can't hear it. You can't feel it. It worked out really well.